Hey everyone, it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This week, I'm looking at the top 10 cards from the set that was just released today, Conspiracy Take the Crown. While the cards in the set are not legal in Modern or Standard, they are legal in popular formats like EDH, Legacy, and Vintage, and in today's list I'm actually going to do something a little bit different than I've ever done in an MTG Top 10 before, and divide this top 10 list into two separate top 5s. The first of these top 5 lists will be the top 5 cards I'm happiest they reprinted in Conspiracy Take the Crown, and the second one will be the top 5 new cards in Conspiracy for EDH. Let's get started with the reprints I'm the most excited about. For each of the reprints, I will also provide information about how much the card costs now and when it was last reprinted. At number 5, we have Phyrexian Arena, a card that has only ever been printed at Rare, so it is a little bit expensive because of scarcity, especially because it hasn't been printed in a set with like a normal supply. It's been reprinted as like a promo or in dual decks and stuff like that, but not in a normal set since 9th edition, which also means it hasn't been reprinted in a black border since all the way back in Apocalypse, which was in the late 90s, I believe. So that was a very long time ago. And the card goes for about $8 in paper, and it's basically a staple in EDH, so it's the kind of card that I'm happy they printed for the EDH players. Doesn't see much play in Modern, really, and maybe in some like Friday Night Magic top decks. It seems like a good enough card for that, but you don't really see it on top 8s or anything like that at Grand Prix or anything. But it's a card that will be great for EDH players. I'm glad they printed it. I hope it gets cheaper because of it. At number 4, I have Show and Tell. Now, when Eternal Masters came out a few months ago, I did a top 10 list of cards I wish they had reprinted in Eternal Masters, and Show and Tell was on the list, so I'm glad they reprinted it here. And in fact, it will probably show up in even larger quantities being in Conspiracy than it would have in Eternal Masters. The card is stupid expensive right now, and yes, they printed it at Mythic, so it won't be super easy to get your hands on, but it should make the card more attainable for the most part. Hopefully it'll dip below $50 at least. The card sees a lot of play in Legacy right alongside the card Sneak Attack, a deck called Sneak and Show, and Sneak Attack was actually reprinted in Eternal Masters, so with those two reprints, maybe it'll become a little bit cheaper and a little bit easier to build a competitive deck in Legacy thanks to both of those reprints. And Show and Tell hopefully will drop a little bit thanks to this reprint. At number 3, I have Beast Within. The top 3 cards on this list are all cards that, despite being printed originally at uncommon or lower, are kind of ridiculously costed. And Beast Within is one of those cards. It's a card that sees play both in Modern and in EDH, especially in EDH. It's basically a staple for a green deck. Green decks just do not have a lot of ways of destroying any permanent they want to, and this allows them to do it. You know, it has a minor downside, especially in EDH, it's a minor downside. And it also sees play in Living Index in Modern, where you can use it to nuke any problem permanent, and then when you cast your Living End, you just blow up their beast token anyway, and you don't really care about it. So that's the reason the price of the card is as high as it is, despite the fact that it was printed at Uncommon originally in New Phyrexia. And hopefully the price will drop significantly thanks to it being printed at Uncommon in a set that has a fairly large supply. At number 2, we have Inquisition of Kozilek. This is another card that has an absurd price tag despite being printed at a rarity below rare originally. It was originally printed at Uncommon. And it's another card that I had on my list of cards that I wished they had reprinted in Eternal Masters. So I got another wish granted here. Inquisition sees a ton of play in Modern. It's in basically every black deck there is, especially in Jund, which is a deck that top 8s all the time. It was originally printed as an uncommon, like I said, but despite that, in paper, it costs almost $12 each. That means it's almost $50 just to buy 4 uncommons, which is a little ridiculous. They did reprint it at rare, probably trying to keep the price from completely dropping. If they printed it at uncommon again, it probably would have gone down even more, but it'll still be on the market in much greater numbers, and hopefully it'll drop, below $8 or $9 at least, and it'll be a little easier to build a modern deck that happens to have black in it. So the card that I'm happiest they reprinted in Conspiracy 2 is yet another card I was disappointed they didn't reprint in Eternal Masters, and that is Serum Visions. Like the other cards, the last few cards I mentioned, it is probably even better that they printed Serum Visions in Conspiracy Take the Crown rather than in Eternal Masters, because it'll show up in larger quantities. Serum Visions, like Inquisition of Kozilek, is a staple in Modern, showing up in basically any blue deck, and as such, despite being originally printed as a common, believe it or not, a 4-set of the card in paper sets you back more than $20 right now. Hopefully that will change thanks to the reprint. So that does it for the top 5 cards I'm the happiest that they reprinted in Conspiracy Take the Crown. And now we'll sort of shift gears and look at the top 5 cards that I think will be the most interesting for Commander and EDH that were printed in Conspiracy Take the Crown. And these are all cards that are new printings. None of them are reprints. So for that list, we will start at number 5 with Expropriate. And I should mention that I don't include any legendary creatures on my top list for EDH. That's because obviously they will and should see play one way or another as a commander, and maybe even in other places. So this list doesn't have any of the new legendary cards they printed. They're all going to see play, and everyone knows that. But let's get started by talking about these 5 cards that I think that were printed in Conspiracy that I'm the happiest that they printed for EDH players. At number 5, I have Expropriate. And yes, it has a hefty mana cost of 9, which is a ton of mana, but it does do something completely game-breaking, and that's what you want to do if you pay 9 mana. This has got to be one of the best things you can do with 9 mana in any multiplayer game, especially in EDH. For 9 mana, you make everyone at the table decide whether they want to give you a permanent of their own choice, or of your choice rather, not their choice, or if you get to take an extra turn. Taking extra turns and stealing permanents are Blue's 2 most powerful plays in EDH, and this card does both. I'm fairly certain there's not another card in existence that can both steal a permanent and give you an extra turn. This card obviously isn't going to be worth playing if you're just playing one-on-one in EDH. It'll either just be a really bad Confiscate or a really bad Time Walk. But as soon as you get to a 3-player game, paying 9 mana for, let's say, a permanent and an extra turn, or 2 permanents or an extra turn is pretty powerful. And that's why I think it'll probably show up in most blue decks that people intend in playing in multiplayer, just because it's a completely game-breaking and incredibly powerful effect. At number 4, I have the only gold card on the list, but this one is so strong I think it deserves a mention. 3 mana Planeswalkers have a history of being incredibly strong in most formats that they can be played in, such as Liliana of the Veil, Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, and Liliana the Last Hope from the fairly recent past. And Duretti sort of continues that trend. He's a very powerful Planeswalker, especially for his mana cost. He can protect himself with creature tokens he makes, and not only that, these creature tokens happen to be artifacts. He can also use those same creature tokens, or any other artifact, and sacrifice them to destroy any artifact or creature. That's an incredibly strong ability, especially when you put it into an artifact-heavy deck. Any sort of flexible removal like that is always good. His ultimate is also pretty ridiculous, allowing you to put multiple copies of any artifact in play or in the graveyard onto the battlefield. I'm not a Legacy expert by any stretch, but in addition to being the best red-black Planeswalker for EDH, I wouldn't be completely surprised to see this guy take a run at Legacy in some sort of artifact-based deck there, just because his abilities are that powerful. At number 3, I have Regal Behemoth. Green decks are the best at ramping, and this Behemoth makes them even better. Regal Behemoth is the first and only card on the list to use the special Conspiracy Take the Crown mechanic of Monarch. Regal Behemoth makes you the Monarch, but what does that mean exactly? Well, this token, Monarch token, it's actually sort of more of an emblem, I guess, tells you exactly what that is. It means you get to draw an extra card at every one of your end steps, first of all. Second of all, if one of your opponent's creatures deals damage to you, they become the Monarch. So it's pretty powerful in that it grants you the opportunity to draw extra cards, but it'll also probably draw other players' aggression because they want to be the Monarch as well, which is very flavorful. That's kind of what the set's about. And so, other people could take away your ability to be the Monarch. But Regal Behemoth adds to that bonus. There's several cards in the set that do additional things if you happen to be the Monarch, and Regal Behemoth gives you the ability to double all the mana in your mana pool. And green decks love effects that can do this. Regal Behemoth does it for you. It'll be interesting to see how easy it is to remain the Monarch, especially in multiplayer EDH games. But I'll give this guy the benefit of the doubt for now because of his powerful effect. At number 2, I have another card that I think might have some potential in a format like Legacy, where the card is getting some buzz for Death and Taxes decks, but it will definitely be good in EDH, and that is Recruiter of the Guard. Tutor effects are always great in EDH because of its nature as a singleton format, and Recruiter of the Guard can search up some pretty nice cards. It might sound like kind of a narrow effect, only fetching you cards with toughness of 2 or less, but there are plenty of important EDH cards that fit that bill. In white, there are strong cards like Karmic Guide and Stoneforge Mystic. Outside of white, there are other nice cards that happen to have removal attached to them, like Shriekmaw and Flametongue Kavu. You can also search up utility creatures in green, if you happen to be green-white, like Eternal Witness, Acidic Slime, or or Reclamation Sage, or if you happen to be white-blue, you can fetch something like True Name Nemesis, which is a powerful win condition. And those are just the cards I can think of without doing a detailed Gatherer search. I'm sure if you go to Gatherer and type in creatures with toughness 2 or less, you're going to find even more things you'd be happy to grab with Recruiter of the Guard. I'm sure there's a ton of possibilities out there. And finally, at number 1, I have Subterranean Tremors. I'll admit, maybe Recruiter of the Guard deserved to be here more. It's probably the card on this list most likely to become a staple, but I love this card too much for it not to be my number 1. I like this card a lot because it's flexible. It can be used to kill a bunch of ground creatures. If those ground creatures happen to be large, suddenly you get to nuke all artifacts too, and your opponent basically always has annoying artifacts in play in EDH. I'm already pretty happy with a card that for 5 mana blows up all artifacts and kills the vast majority of creatures in play, but on top of that, if you have enough mana to dump into it, you also get an awesome 8/8 Lizard who shows up on the battlefield after his underground burrowing has nuked it. So it's a cool, flavorful card in that way, and that's a lot of value in one card and exactly the kind of super powerful effect that should be a staple in most red EDH decks going forward. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, don't forget to click the like button. If you have any questions or comments, maybe suggestions about cards I should have included or not included, post them in the comments below. And if you want to make sure you catch an MTG Top 10 each and every week, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.